Hello, everybody. Real quick, before this video begins, I just wanted to mention that I'm working on getting my narrations on streaming services like Spotify, iTunes, Amazon. I have a few of the stories up so far. It takes a while to do each story. If you just search The Dark Somnium on any of those streaming platforms, you'll start to see my stories. But this video is a collaboration with Mr. Creeps, Spirit Voices, and a brief cameo by Swamp Dweller. And I want to take a moment to mention that Spirit Voices, the female narrator in this, she's an insanely good narrator. So if you guys like her voice when you hear it in the story, just so you guys know, she only has like 100 subscribers right now. It's crazy to me. It's crazy. 100 subscribers. She's better than I am. It's lunacy. But yeah, if you guys like her narration, make sure to subscribe to her channel because she definitely deserves more than 100 subscribers. With that said, enjoy the video.
Everybody deals with grief differently. I told myself that several times. It is how I justified my actions. How foolish they were. Grief is nothing but a poison that corrupts the human heart, soiling any sense of conscience that would dissuade the unwise. I made mistakes due to my obsession with the dead, or at least one dead man. I needed answers, and the dead do not give them without assistance. I felt tired, withered by nightmares of regret. I should not have lived through the turmoil that I had witnessed in the past, yet I did, only because of one man. He died in my stead, and I could not forgive myself for that. Often I asked myself why he perished and I lived. He made the choice, though, and I just needed some sort of answer, but I was unsure of what question it was to. The streets, shrouded by midnight and shadow, called me forth, leading me to the old cemetery. Not a soul, living or dead, stirred, and if not be for the bouncing flames of the street lanterns, I would have been alone in the dark. The stone walls of the cemetery, once gray, sat blackened around the edges. Water from thick, damp air collected about the metal tips of the gate, rolling down and dissipating onto the rough stone street. I wrapped my fingers around the blackened steel gate, peering into the shadow-laid cemetery. Lanterns sat next to many crypts, flickering a hellish orange haze into the low fog that moved between the above-ground graves. Had I been wiser, I would have turned back an hour ago. Yet grief corrupted my heart, and any sense of wisdom fleeted from my body, swallowed by the swelling blackness of the night. I pressed the gate forward, entering into such a dead place. The air felt thicker within my lungs, hot and moist too. I wore my evening dress, a thick overcoat with my black pants and vest. I chose my top hat too. The one who sent me to the grim sight told me to come dressed for a funeral. My cane clacked against the stone, sending a haunting echo throughout the cemetery that vibrated the many stone crypts. The sound carried for a long way, lost within the maze of death before me. I carried not a lantern or a light source. I was told not to. The flames within the lanterns that lined the crypts did not help my vision, for before me laid a thick, unbreakable wall of shadow that I blindly entered. I wandered the cemetery for many moments, stumbling in the dark. It was only when I stopped to regain my bearings among the twilight I realized I stood where I'd been told to meet. Before me loomed an ominous sight. Great stacks of stone laid piled atop one another, smoothed with such precision and held in place by such a pale mortar. A great crypt it was, and mighty too, for atop it stood a great angel, that of death, shrouded behind a stone veil. The flames of the lantern bounced off the great stonework, dancing atop ripples of the cold stone shroud. I found myself lost within such a sight, for I had not seen it since its construction. I dared not return to such a dead place. My heart could not bear it. I broke my gaze from the stone angel, looking downward to the center of the crypt. The name, Daniel H. Tipton, sat written in brass and glowed with the hellish flames of the lanterns. A voice called to me from the shadows from whence I came.
"You are alone, stranger."
I turned, seeing the blanket of darkness lingering between two other massive crypts. The silhouette of a man came into view as he approached at a slow pace. He too wore a top hat, but his was worn and withered in time. His suit, brown and tan, was ripped and torn around the edges with small patchwork on elbows and knees. His cane, flimsy and of cheap wood, carried no echo as he stepped into the red glow of the lantern. I recognized his face. It was just as gaunt and withered as his suit. He dare not tell me, so I only knew him as the messenger. "I am," I told him with a nod.
This is not who I thought you wished to see,
the messenger said.
'Tis a strange request.
I turned back for a moment, watching the reflection of the flames dance across the metal name once more. I said quickly, "I do not know him well, but I stand here now because of him."
I see. A comrade, then.
I nodded. "I don't like to talk about it much."
Is he in there?
He asked me, grabbing one of the metal lanterns that lined the stone walkway. He held it in his hand, raising it up higher to read the name on the crypt. "No," I informed him. "He is somewhere in France. It's only a memorial." The messenger shook his head, lowering the lantern. I watched as his glassy eyes reflected the flames. He held no emotions, but I knew he tried to convey some sort of disappointment.
That is not what I told you. I informed you that they need to be buried here. Either that or we must go to France.
He said to me. "What difference does it make?" I asked. "He is dead regardless. His spirit can be—"
Do not speak of matters you do not understand, stranger.
The messenger interrupted. "I'm sorry." I apologized, half-heartedly. "I did not understand." The messenger continued.
He is beyond this place now. Further beyond than you can possibly understand. You told me that he was here. This changes things, and I cannot help you.
"You said I'd be able to speak to him." I became angered.
I said that I could show you him, for I hold the eyes of the dead and not their tongue. Without the corpse, I dare not risk such a task.
He explained. The gaunt man turned his back to me, and I, without hesitation, reached to grab his shoulder. I felt the coldness of his aura as I grasped his bony collar. Cold his visions were, as he once told me, and he carried them with him. "I'll pay triple!" He turned to me slowly, and I released my hand.
I can show you your friend. It will not be as we discussed.
I watched as his eyes danced with the infernal flames of his lantern. They dared not to look at me, for they became transfixed on the name of Daniel H. Tipton. I could see the metal reflection of his milky irises. Strange shadows danced within his pupils, and I felt myself lost as I looked deep within the eyes of the seer. It was only when he blinked that I found myself back within reality. He whispered to me, nudging his lantern forward.
Follow, and I will show you your comrade. I warn thee.
He continued.
What visions you will see within my home will be beyond repair. Take a moment, think on this, and follow if you choose. If not, I understand.
The messenger set his lantern down upon the cobblestone ground between us. I watched as he turned his back to me, removing his worn hat and tucking it under his arm. His cane bounced across the stone. Still, no echo followed. The shadows that enveloped the crypts reached out with long strands as the light vacated the further he walked, and wrapped themselves around the cold aura he carried. The fog rose, creating a thick wall of mist before me. The light of the lantern dared not corrupt the gray pale. The messenger soon disappeared among the darkened mist. I hesitated, for I feared to know what stirred beyond the veil of our reality. I looked back towards the crypt of my long-dead comrade. The shrouded stone angel stared down upon me, and I could not look back, for her stare, while false, filled me with such anguish, and I turned back toward the fog, which had parted in such a short time. It created a corridor, and at the end of it laid a thick shadow. Within that shadow I could barely make out the silhouette of a man, one who stood nude among the darkness. His arms stretched out toward me, gaunt and withered with time. His eyes sat void of all color within their deep, empty sockets. Only the color of the lanterns reflected off those long, dead pupils. The shadows writhed around him, and I thought, for only a second, that I knew him, but I could not place it. He stood hairless in the dark, and as pale as fog itself. His fingers beckoned me forward. His lips appeared to move to speak, but no sound flowed from them. Then, just as quickly as I had seen the figure, it faded into the dark. I, with a heart of grief, followed the messenger without a second thought. The seer led me outside of the city, deep within the filthy swamplands. Only his lantern lit the way for us as we marched through the thick, sinking muds and pools of filthy water. The dense, warm air grew cold in the wake of the messenger, yet the waters were as warm as pools of fresh blood. Steam rose from the algae-green swamps, blending with the low-hanging fog that wrapped around the ancient cypress trees that surrounded us. Their roots were deep, forever part of the earth, and their trunks reached with long, wooden skeleton hands into the swamp.
Just ahead,
said the messenger.
I gave you a fair warning. There will be no looking back past this point. And turn now if you wish.
My suit is already ruined, I joked. What would be the point?
The dead have no use for humor,
he informed me.
You will see it's all within my house of tinctures.
On the banks of the swamp sat an old wooden house, as ancient as the trees themselves. Its wooden paneling decayed on the edges. The stone that held it above the loose foundation of the earth sat blackened by the dark mud. A candle flickered within the home, obscured by murky, dirt-covered windows. The messenger blew his lantern as we approached through knee-high water, shrouding our arrival within the early twilight. Deep within the dark, I could see strange visions that I had not seen before, carried scents, for small glowing pupils looked down at me from the many cypress. Human they were in shape, but belonged to no living creature. I dared not look upon them, for I became hesitant to continue.
Enter my home,
said the messenger, as he stood on the bank of the swamp.
I will be in shortly.
I did as he commanded. His old wooden door nearly fell from its rusted hinges as I slowly opened it. The interior smelt of incense and forbidden knowledge. The single candle on the windowsill was the only light source within the seer's home, and it flickered wildly upon my entry. Many bottles of odd substances and objects lined the walls. Hundreds of them glistened under the light of the candle. Their murky liquids appeared to stir under the low light. The messenger entered after me, quickly shutting the door behind him. He motioned me toward the floor and said,
Sit here.
I did as I was asked, for the man held no furniture, and not a sign of a place to slumber existed either. I crossed my legs as I sat. The odd man moved away from me, towards the window, and slowly grabbed the candle. He set it before me on the floor and said,
Look into the flame, my friend.
As I did what I was commanded, he sat across from me. He sat upon his knees, as if some form of worship were to begin. He set his top hat on the floor, and from within it, a piece of chalk rolled free. His long, bony fingers quickly grabbed a hold of it, and soon he drew a triangle with odd symbols at the edges of it around the candle.
There is no going back now,
he warned.
The dead do not like the company of the living, especially those who are not gifted.
Gifted? I asked, raising my eye from the candle to meet his.
Do not break your gaze until I say, 'tis such a dangerous thing.
He snapped his fingers at me, and the clack forced me to look back to the candle. I nodded. The seer removed his tattered and patched jacket, and from one of its pockets emerged a small mirror within his hand. He held it at the base of the pyramid that he drew, causing the candle to be doubled within my vision. He said softly,
Look into the mirror now.
I did so. I could see the flame dance within the looking glass, and its glow radiated off the tips of the strange man's fingers that wrapped around the edges of the reflective material. In his other hand, he drew 7 rods behind the pyramid, and atop them, other strange symbols in the form of animals. Around the base of the candle, he drew the shape of an eye, one that I had seen while studying the ancient mythology of Egypt. I heard him muttering something under his breath, but I dared not shift my gaze from the mirror when I asked, What are those?
One of the crossing points,
he said, pointing to the pyramid. He traced the edge of the triangle, stopping at the 3 symbols upon the edges.
The dead, the seers, and the speakers.
His fingers moved toward one of the rod-like structures behind the pyramid.
The 7 spires.
He opened his palm to present the symbols atop the spires.
They're gatekeepers.
He then tapped his finger in front of the symbol of the Eye of Horus.
The great priest.
Then, his finger followed up the shaft of the candle and stopped just at the edge of the flame. He held it there for a moment, and I knew that the flame licked the tip of his finger, but he did not recoil. He then said softly,
Whom they serve.
And who is that?
You will see,
he informed me. Will I see Daniel? I asked. This is what I'm paying you for.
Things have changed,
he informed me.
For his corpse is not here, and I cannot work without such a thing. We must deal with the one who holds him.
My eyes shifted from the mirror because I felt myself duped. I looked to the messenger who sat with his head tilted back as he stared into the blackness that hung from the ceiling. I looked to the messenger who sat with his head tilted back as he stared into the blackness that hung from his ceiling. In it, I could see the shadows swirl and the withered corpses of many lost names floating among them. Their hellfire eyes stared down upon me. The seer shouted,
"Dare not look away."
I knew then that I not need worry of being tricked, for I was in the presence of something otherworldly. My eyes returned to the mirror, and I chose not to look away. Around the edges of my eyes, I could see the dead swimming among the shadows of the House of Tinctures. The flame of the candle bounced wildly before me. Its radiant orange filled my eyes, but in the mirror, its reflection became a violet hue, one that I had not seen among any flame.
"Dare not look away again,"
the seer shouted.
"It will be tempting, stranger, but I beg of thee not to do it."
I nodded, and as I did so, a great roar filled the room. A weight it carried, one which I had felt upon my shoulders as I became forced to lean closer to the flickering candle. The chalk fell from the messenger's hand and rolled across the floor. A great echo followed it, and his small home had turned into a large cavern of shadow and twilight, filled with the souls of the dead. I could hear the rushing of water and the screams of those lost to time. My heart raced wildly, and I wanted to turn back. I wanted to flee, for the otherworldly no longer concerned me. The visions around the edges of my eyes were truly haunting, truly disturbing, truly lost to any sort of reality that I could ever imagine. The screams grew louder. I could hear artillery in the distance, beating drums and dancing tongues, cries from the dead and dying, something that I had only heard once before and wished to never hear again. Then, just as I felt all the air within my lungs turn a frosty cold, all went quiet, and the candle became extinguished. We sat in the darkness, complete and utter shadow. My eyes soon adjusted, and I could see the old wooden floors of the messenger's home no longer sat beneath me. Instead, a cold, solid sheet of ice glistened a haunting violet hue. As I stared into my reflection, I felt the tension rising within my body, and I could no longer contain it. I exhaled my frozen lungs, and a thick, dense fog rolled from between my lips. Thick flakes of snow began to pepper me and my reflection. They collected around the edges of the mirror and onto the fingers of the messenger. He spoke.
"You may look away now if you please.
Where are we?
Your body is here with mine, but our minds are beyond now,"
he replied. Is it safe to look away? I don't know what I'll see. A voice, as cold as the air and as hollow as the empty chasms of shadow that surrounded my vision, came from somewhere in the distance.
"You will see what you desire, mortal."
I felt my eyes rise from the reflection for a second, but only a second. They reached the messenger's bony wrist before I tried to look back. The messenger lowered the mirror, though, placing it back within his pocket. He stated,
"'Tis too late now, stranger. You must face what stirs beyond."
I don't know if I can. I've seen war, I've seen death, destruction, but I don't know if I can see this.
"You have no say now,"
he replied, standing. My eyes shifted from his hand, and I finally looked around where we sat. It appeared to be some great cavern. Black stones surrounded us on 3 sides. Tall were the structures, and jagged too. The snow that fell collected atop the obsidian-type formations, but only for a moment, for it quickly melted. A cold rush of wind came from deep on the other side, between the puffs of thick fog that rolled in. I could see a city on the horizon. It, though, was obscured by shadow and storm, for only when lightning crashed against a tall, looming ivory spire could I see it. I felt the snow land atop my shoulders, and I removed my hat to witness the great oddity that unfolded before my very eyes. As I glanced upward to see where the snow came from, I could see a great opening, one that led into nothing but shadow. Endless was the void, and black stars twinkled behind low-hanging clouds of what I assumed to be toxic fumes. Another spire stood, encased with a thick frost. The cavern where I entered this plain sat at the base of it. Beneath the frost that wrapped around the spire sat ivory and bone, skulls stacked upon femurs, teeth and great tusks of creatures long dead. A strange sound came from the other end of the cavern, the side that sat enclosed by ice and black stone. I turned, seeing nothing at first but a wall of shadow that swayed in the cold breeze like serpents among black waters. Slowly, though, 2 glowing orbs appeared, small but infernal in color and vibrant too. They sat parallel to one another, and it was only after my eyes adjusted to the darkness of the void before me that I could see that they were sitting within darkened, sunken sockets. They belonged to a man, withered and malnourished. His ribs did not rise as if he were breathing. His chest stayed stagnant, snow collecting on the jagged bone cage that protruded from beneath his gray flesh. The man stood nude, slightly shivering in the dark. His head sat hairless and his face empty of all expression. I turned to the messenger, speaking quickly.
"Is this him? Is this Daniel H. Tipton?"
Yet the messenger was not there. I stood alone with whatever lingered in the outer dark of the cavern. A voice came from the great opening behind me. It was light, yet hollow, raspy, and as cold as the air that surrounded me. It spoke without hesitation, and each syllable bent the fog to its unseen will.
"You are alone now."
"Who are you?"
I asked the voice.
"Dare you question me? Dare you enter my spire with such authority?"
"Where is the messenger?"
"You are my guest. Your vision is one and the same now. His gift is carried to you for now. How unwise of him to profit from such a talent."
The voice came, harsher than before. I turned back toward the silhouette of the dead, hairless man. I stepped forward on the ice, but my feet slipped, and I knew that I could not pass across such a frozen plain. I stayed put, watching the dead man as he watched me. I asked the voice,
"Is this my friend? My old comrade?"
"You wanted to see him. Here he is."
The voice replied. I looked back toward the cavern opening, and I could see, just beyond the fog, a strange statue that had not been there before. It was made of obsidian, glistening with a violet hue. It was the body of a nude woman. Atop her sat that of an owl. The statue stared off in the void. Just as quickly as I saw the strange structure, it too faded like that city that I had seen. I stared at the living corpse of my dead companion.
"Daniel, it's me! Do you remember?"
Daniel's jaw dropped and only a haunting, hollowed scream escaped from the mouth. It was deafening, awe-inspiring, for I had never heard such a sound in all my years. I had seen war and death. I had heard the sounds it brings, yet I had never heard something so terrifying, so awful, so dreadful. What followed was nothing but clicks of his tongue and deep, guttural sounds. There was rhythm to them, that much I knew.
"You do not speak the language of the dead, and neither does your seer."
What did he say? I asked the voice, not breaking my gaze from the withered husk of Daniel.
"Does it matter? Does it truly matter what a dead man says?"
The statue. On the ice before the opening sat a great horned owl. Its dark-colored feathers ruffled under that cold violet hue. Its eyes were a deep gold at the center, but black around the edges. From them, shadows seeped upward into the void as a glow of crescent moons danced within the centers. The owl spoke to me in that same haunting voice, but its beak did not move.
"Did you not know the man well enough in life? Why now, after death, does he matter to you?"
He died in my stead. I cannot help but think that it is me who should be in such a place.
"A life for a life is all but the same to me. You too will have your time, for you cannot outrun the inevitable."
"It haunts me."
"It always will. Say, did you come here to be rid of your grief, while speaking to a man who died for you, one whom you barely knew or spoke of during his life, truly subside the grief that swells deep within your heart?"
I fell to my knees. A cold, sharp pain radiated my body as I made contact with the hard, frozen cavern floor. I pleaded to the horned owl.
"Please, I need to know. It is all I think of. It is all I dream of. He perished for me. I need to know."
"Know what?"
The owl asked. The fog wrapped around its sharp talons that clacked against the ice, sending shivers of dread into my beating heart.
"If it was worth it."
I replied.
Does it look to be so? You traveled all this way, risked all just to ask what you already know.
Please, let me speak to him. If you have that power, I would be forever grateful.
How grateful? And to whom? Myself? To Daniel H. Tipton? Or to yourself?
I began to sob, for in the presence of such a dreadful wonder, I still needed the answers that I sought.
Lieutenant.
I heard a hollow voice echo from behind me. I could not understand it, but those haunting clicks and guttural sounds lingered behind it. I turned, standing once more. I could not recognize the voice, but it had to be Daniel. It had to be. There was no other way. I tried to step forward once more, yet I could not do so. My knees buckled due to the slippery surface of the ice, and I collapsed. I cried out in pain, physical and mental, as I stared into those glowing hellfire eyes that I no longer recognized. I shouted and wept.
Daniel, I need to know. I needed to know if you were all right. I needed to know if it was all worth it. You saved me. You gave your life when you shouldn't have, and I tried to do my best to make it worth it. This place, it's not what I thought, but please tell me you're all right. Tell me that it's all fine. I'm grateful for your sacrifice. Just please, tell me it was worth it.
The writhing shadows grew in rhythm, slithering about Daniel's nude body. His eyes stared into mine, and I could not take the dread that they brought with them. They felt so cold, so lost, so otherworldly. His mouth did not move as he responded.
I made a great mistake.
Just as the words left his lips, the shadows grew around him, devouring him from my view, and left me staring into a black, empty void. I could see the great city again, with 6 spires in the distance. I stood at the base of the 7th, the furthest away. A tall, grand structure, a citadel of sorts, stood at the heart of the grand city, and above it swirled a massive entity, that of which I cannot explain, but its blue eyes stared down on me and set my innards aflame, though it only lasted a second, for that soon fell from view. Stared into my soul.
Bring him back,
I shouted.
That cannot be all he has to say.
It's all he ever says.
With that, the shadows grew around me and they too swallowed me. The horned owl stood before me. Within its deep, dark eyes, I became lost within the 2 crescent moons that sat within its pupils. They shattered any piece of sanity that remained within me. The great storm above the city now rained down above the cavern, and the snow faded away. The ice began to crack, sending dark tentacles of dread upward toward the roof, blending with the twinkling black stars behind the thick, thundery clouds. They wrapped around me, and above I could see that great hulking eye staring down upon me. I felt as if I were nothing in its presence, and nothing else mattered. Life did not matter, death did not matter, I did not matter. Tipton did not matter, nor whatever he had to say, only whatever that strange creature, that strange hulking mass of chaotic dread. That is all that mattered, and would ever matter from that point forward. I closed my eyes, screaming in such fear of what I realized. There would be no cure for my grief, for it did not matter. The dead did not give any answers that I sought, for they too did not matter. I became lost amongst the shadow, and my heart drowned beneath the swelling ocean of consternation. I felt a hand reach out and touch me. I quickly swatted it away, standing, running backwards from whatever tried to grab a hold of me. I opened my eyes, seeing that I stood in the seer's home once more. He still knelt before the extinguished candle. The ribbon of gray smoke that flowed from the wick appeared thick, as if it were just blown out. The messenger's eyes grew wide, for I knew that we shared the same vision, and he saw what I did, and said,
I warned you to only let me show you.
I needed to speak with him. I stated. I just had to know.
And now you do, though it was not exactly what you thought.
The messenger responded. What was that? I could not come to try and explain. The messenger's milky eyes became lost as he stared into the coiling smoke of the candle.
You will know when you two perish. All becomes clear.
I couldn't respond. I wanted to. I had to. I needed answers, but something within my heart told me to keep my mouth shut, for I had seen something. The great beyond, and that is something no mortal should bear witness. The seer's eyes finally broke from the smoke of the candle, and he stared into mine, and I knew that he could see my soul stripped bare, for I became nothing but a husk of what I once was. I felt drained, lethargic, naked in the dark. I could not stare back at him, for in his eyes I could see that city. I could see that owl. I could see Tipton in that great eye. He told me.
I made a grave mistake.
And that was all I knew to be certain.